Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the greatest and most iconic guitar players of all time, the master of the sweep picking technique and one of the true pioneers of the legato style of playing, and a musician who I have been wanting to talk about on this series for a really long time now, ever since I started this series back in 2020. So I am super pumped and very excited to be discussing this guitar legend's incredible solo catalogue of albums. And he has been a force in the guitar world for close to almost 4 decades now, and he's seen it all, done it all, and played and collaborated with just about everyone you can imagine. And this is a guy who, quite frankly, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only legendary Australian guitarist, composer, and bandleader, Frank Gambale. So the first time that I became aware of Frank Gambale was back in the mid 1990s when my dad recorded a live concert of the Chick Corea Elektric Band from the German channel Freesat, and Frank Gambale was part of the Electric Band during that live performance, and there was something about Gambale's guitar playing that really drew me in. He was playing jazz, but it was rocked up and cranked up to 100. It was really loud, really impactful, and packed a hell of a punch. And the interesting thing about Frank Gambale was his ferocity, his speed, his technique. There was influences of jazz, rock, a bit of blues, and a bit of pop. You name it, it was all there, but it sounded so fresh and so original, and you could clearly hear there were influences of Alan Holdsworth in his playing, but he wasn't what you would call a Holdsworth clone. He was very much his own man with his own style, his own identity, and his own unique voice. And he was just incredible. I had never seen a guitar player play the way that Frank Gambale did. And the thing with Frank Gambale, I have always put him in this trinity of legato style of playing with Alan Holdsworth and Scott Henderson, but he is a completely different beast to Holdsworth and Henderson. Holdsworth played in a more jazzier sort of style, whereas Henderson, he plays more in a bluesy kind of style, but Gambale, he sits somewhere kind of in the middle. He was jazz, but there was a bit of blues, but there was also plenty of rock in his playing. But he took those influences and turned it into his own sound and made everything all his own. And that to me really sets Frank Gambale apart from a lot of other guitar players. There are not many guitarists who sound quite like him. When you hear Frank Gambale, you know straight away it's him because he has such a distinct and recognizable sound. And since the mid 80s, Frank Gambale has seen it all, done it all, and played and collaborated with just about everyone from Tony Muschamp to Billy Cobham to Maurizio Colonia to the Mark Varney Project with Alan Holdsworth, Brett Garsted, and Sean Lane to Vital Information to GHS with Stuart Ham and Steve Smith to T. Levitz, and of course he is best known for his long association as a member of the classic lineup of the Chick Corea Elektric Band with Dave Weckl, John Patitucci, and Eric Merenfall, and has also been a member of the Return to Forever 4 incarnation with Chick Corea, Jean-Luc Ponty, Lenny White, and Stanley Clarke, and is the only musician who has played in both iconic Chick Corea-led ensembles, the Electric Band and Return to Forever. And just like Aldo Meola helped put Return to Forever on the map back in the 70s, Frank Gambale did the exact same thing as he helped put the Electric Band on the map back in the mid 80s to the early 90s and was an important collaborator for Chick Corea. So, for today's special edition, I'm going to be taking a look at Frank Gambale's solo catalogue of albums, which is a total of 16 albums, including 12 studio albums and 4 live recordings. And I can honestly tell you now, there is no bad album in the catalogue of Frank Gambale. Obviously, there are some albums that are better than others, but I think what you will find as we go through Frank Gambale's solo catalogue is all of his albums are very, very much in the fusion realm. They're all different, and one thing you will notice as we go along here is Frank Gambale's guitar playing evolves. On his earlier albums, they were more in the shredding style of playing, and then it evolves into a more jazzier style, and then it evolves into a more rockier kind of approach, and then it goes into a more smooth jazz style of playing, and then it goes into a more laid back flamenco style of playing. But you can still hear it's Frank Gambale, and he is a guy who is always constantly reinventing himself and changing his style and sound and keeping things fresh and never repeating himself twice. He's always trying out new and different things. And that for me sets Frank Gambale apart from a lot of other guitarists. He's always willing to try new things and take risks. And that to me makes him one of the all time guitar greats. So, for today's special edition, I am going to be taking a look at Frank Gambale's solo catalogue of albums, which is a total of 16 albums, 12 studio albums, and 4 live recordings. And I can honestly tell you now, there is no bad album in this catalogue. Obviously, there are some albums that are better than others, but I think what everyone will appreciate and respect with Frank Gambale's music is although it's very much in the fusion realm, they're all different. They all have their own unique voice and their own identity. And one thing you will notice as we go through Frank Gambale's solo catalogue is his guitar playing evolves. It starts out as more of a shredding style of playing, then it changes into a more jazzier style, then it goes into a more rockier kind of approach, then it goes into a more smooth jazz type of playing, and then it goes into a more laid back flamenco style of playing. But it's still very much Frank Gambale. You can hear it's him, and that's a true testament to the musician that Frank Gambale is. He is always constantly reinventing himself, changing things up, refining his sound. And if you were to take, for example, his first album and put it up against his most recent album, they don't sound the same. They're both different. And Frank Gambale has always been able to adapt and change with the times. And that to me makes him one of the most important figures in the guitar world. He never stays in the same place and he never repeats the same thing twice. He's always coming up with new ideas all the time. So, as always, I am going to be talking about each album individually and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. And before we get rolling, a special shout out to Eric Porter and George Lemay from 4 Fusion Friday, who inspired me to put this together as they have discussed on some of their most recent episodes a couple of Frank Gambale's albums. So this is dedicated to those two amazing gentlemen. So we're going to start with the first album, which came out in 1985, and this is the one that pretty much kick-started the solo career for Frank Gambale, and it's still, to this day, an amazing album, Brave New Guitar. So, Brave New Guitar is the debut album of Frank Gambale, and as you'd expect, it's absolutely amazing. The guitar playing is ferocious, jaw dropping, packs a hell of a punch, and the music at times is very rocky, very jazzy, very laid back, and some of the music is very much similar to the style of sound that the Electric Band would go on to be known for when Frank Gambale joined them. And you could say that Frank Gambale had the Electric Band sound before the Electric Band was even formed. And another interesting highlight is this album came out in 1985, the very same year that Chick Corea formed the Electric Band. So you could say that it was destiny, really, that Frank Gambale and Chick Corea would play together. And this album, as I said, was the one that pretty much started it all, really. It's a really good album. Not an easy one to find, but if you can find it, it's amazing. And this originally came out on Legato Records, and then it was reissued later on Wombat Records. But it's a really good album, and it's one I have kind of forgotten how it sounded. I forgot how good this album really was because when I originally heard it, I had no idea this was Frank Gambale until I started getting into his music later on. And it's really good. It's a really good album. So, musicians featured on here is, of course, Frank Gambale on guitar, Steve Kirschnick on bass, Mark Gasparo on keyboards, John Cross on saxophone and flute, Jack Kelly on drums, Steve Reed on percussion, who would go on to join Russ Freeman's band, the Rippingtons, and remain a mainstay there for many years, and Ki Akagi on piano, who is featured on one track. Great collection of musicians that Frank Gambale has assembled for his debut album, and it doesn't disappoint. Everyone sounds incredible on this album, and all of the compositions are written and composed by Frank Gambale. So we got Fee Fi Fo Funk, which is to me classic Gambale. Blues for Hollywood, another great track. Credit Reference Blues, excellent track. Song for My Family, absolutely gorgeous. Spending Sunday with You, very lovely track. Weddington Street, another great track. Alone Together, another great track. And A Touch of Brazil, another great track as well. But every song from start to finish is excellent. And as I said, if you're looking to get into Frank Gambale's music, this is the perfect one to start with. And pretty much lets you know what Frank Gambale is going to be all about. It's absolutely amazing. So the standout tracks for me are Fee Fi Fo Funk, Blues for Hollywood, Song for My Family, Spending Sunday with You, and A Touch of Brazil. A tremendous debut album for Frank Gambale and the first of many epic albums from one of the greatest guitar players on the planet. So there you have it. Brave New Guitar, excellent album from Frank Gambale, and one that I have started going back to listening to quite a bit now. And a cool reminder that Frank Gambale is one of the all time guitar greats. Tremendous stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1987, and this one is called Presence for the Future. So by 1987, Frank Gambale had already joined the Chick Corea Electric Band, but he was still putting out albums under his name as a band leader. And this album is pretty much a continuation in the style of what Brave New Guitar was, and it's a great follow up. And for me, it's a really good album, and you get to see and hear different sides to Frank Gambale's guitar playing. So pretty much the same lineup as the first album, but we've also got some guest appearances from John Patitucci from the Electric Band, Tom Coster, who would go on to become Frank Gambale's bandmate in Vital Information, and another great musician who would also go on to be one of Frank Gambale's main collaborators, is Steve Tavjoloni, who is an incredible sax player and iwi player as well. He's featured on here quite a lot. But as I said, it's pretty much the same lineup of musicians from Brave New Guitar with a few guest appearances from Patitucci, Tavjoloni, and Costa. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Frank Gambale. So we got Lazy Passion, great opener, Spike Song, another great track as well, which features Frank Gambale on guitar synthesizer. Serenity is another great track. Resident Alien is just ferocious. The Natives are Restless, which is excellent. Legends, which is dedicated to Chick Corea, which is probably my favourite track of the entire album. And it's got a great John Patitucci bass solo. The TARDIS, not sure if that's a reference to Doctor Who or not, but it's a really good track anyway. But the whole album, Present for the Future, is excellent. And the standout tracks for me are Resident Alien, Legends, The Natives Are Restless, Lazy Passion, and Spike's Song. Great album and a great follow up from Brave New Guitar. And again, another album that's not easy to find, but still definitely worth picking up if you can find it. And it's absolutely amazing, as are all of Frank Gambale's albums. So there you have it, a present for the future. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 1989, and it's a live album. And if there was ever an album that really showcased how good of a guitar player Frank Gambale is, it's this one. This one is simply called Live. Now, for Fusion Friday, discussed this album a while back, and I have to agree as well that I think Frank Gambale sounds much better live than he does in the studio. Not to say that Frank Gambale doesn't sound good in the studio, he does, but he really rips it up live and really burns on stage. And this album really packs a mean punch and really gives you a real taste of what Frank Gambale is all about. Because I sometimes feel in the studio Frank Gambale is kind of handcuffed in his own music. I don't know why that is, because he's a fantastic guitar player. And we all know underneath is an animal just waiting to burst out of its cage. And he does here on this live album. And you really get to hear what a monster player Frank Gambale really is. And for me, if we were just talking about live albums only, this one would easily be the best one because it's so good. It's raw, it's gritty, it's edgy, it's punchy, it's got everything you want in a live album. And in a way, this is more like a rock album than a jazz fusion album. It's just so big and so powerful and so monstrous, and it's absolutely amazing. So pretty much the same lineup as his first two albums. We got Frank Gambale on electric and acoustic guitars, Ki Akagi on keyboards, Steve Tavjoloni on saxophones and iwi, Steve Kirschnick on bass, and Joe Hadia on drums. I tell you what, this band absolutely smokes and they really rock. And this was a concert that took place in 1988 at the Baked Potato, legendary club for many musicians who have played there over the years. And Frank Gambale carves his legacy by delivering a live performance for the ages. And a lot of the material that's featured on this album are from Frank Gambale's first two albums, which are Brave New Guitar and A Present for the Future. And even though there are only 6 tracks that are featured on this live album, Frank Gambale really packs a lot in these 6 tracks, and these tracks get the full extended live treatment. So, whereas on the studio albums they were kind of like shortish tracks, here they get the full extended workouts here. So we've got Credit, Reference Blues, Fee Fi Fo Funk, Spending Sunday with You, A Touch of Brazil, Spike Song, The Natives Are Restless. Unbelievable live album. And for me, this is the real Frank Gambale. No disrespect to the first two albums, they're great, but for me, this is Frank Gambale really coming out to play, no pun intended. And everybody in the band, as I said earlier, just absolutely is killing it. They really rock, they really tear it up, and they just absolutely smoke. And the standout tracks for me are Credit Reference Blues, Spending Sunday with You, A Touch of Brazil, and The Natives Are Restless. The only downside to this album is I wish it was longer, and I really wish we got the whole full live performance. Maybe they could have made this a double album because it's so damn good, and you really get to see the real Frank Gambale, and you get to hear what he's all about. And there's a good reason why he was always the go-to guy for Chick Corea's Electric Band. He is just an absolute badass. And here, as great as he sounds with the Electric Band, he sounds even better on his own. He's just an absolute machine on the guitar. So there you have it. Frank Gambale live. Excellent album. And for me, could very well be Frank Gambale's best live album ever. Excellent stuff. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1990, and this one is called Thunder from Down Under. So, although this is a great album, Frank Gambale starts to incorporate vocals and actually starts singing. Now, I've got no issue with Frank Gambale's singing voice. He's actually surprisingly a good singer. I've had this issue before with Carl Verheyen in the past, a great guitar player, but unfortunately, Carl Verheyen, as great as he is on the guitar, he's not the greatest singer in the world. And me being a guitar guy, at the end of the day, I don't really want to hear singing. If I'm truly honest, I just want to hear the guy play his guitar and make great music. And although Frank Gambale didn't do the singing for long, at the same time, it's not really what you want to hear. When you look at the first three albums, which were just dynamite, you get to this album, although very good, still a strong album. There are some vocal tracks that you could kind of do without. I think if I were to cut this album up, take the vocal tracks away, just leave the instrumental, this album would be even higher for me. But it's still a good album nonetheless, but not really what you want to hear. Frank Gambale singing. And as I said, he's not a terrible singer. He's actually pretty good, but it's not really what you want to hear. Imagine Scott Henderson started singing. I don't think you'd want to hear that, would you? I mean, I don't know. He could be a very good singer, but at the end of the day, you just want to hear the guitar. And that's what it's all about here. So, Thunder from Down Under, bit more of a rocky album, but still very much in the fusion realm. But still, as I mentioned, an excellent album. So we've got a special guest appearance from Chick Corea. We've got Vinnie Colaiuta, Joe Hedaya, Greg Bisonet. Oh, he's a damn good drummer. He really is. Tom Brecklin, who has a connection to Chick Corea. He's played with the acoustic band a number of times, subbed for Dave Weckl. Excellent drummer. He's played with a lot of guys as well, including Al Di Meola. Tim Landers, great bass player. Excellent with Billy Cobham. Excellent with Lee Ritenour. Just one of the all-time great bass players. Abraham Laboral, another living legend, obviously known for his long association with Lee Ritenour. Then we got the amazing Steve Chazloni, great sax player. We've got Gary Grant, Louis Conti, Freddie Ravel, and Key Ajiji. So pretty much near enough the same lineup as the first three albums, but with some special guest appearances as well. So let's have a look at this, shall we? So there is all of the tracks, who plays on what, and it's quite a long album actually. There's about 12 tracks on here, and they're all written and composed by Frank Gambale, and the lyrics are provided and written by Frank Gambale and Stephanie Bennett. And as I said, there are a few vocal tracks on here, but at the same time, it's not really what you want to hear. So we kick off with the ferocious opener, Humid Being. I mean, that opening guitar intro is just bone chilling. Really gives me chills hearing that, and it's just excellent. Then we got Faster Than an Arrow. It's not a bad track, but it's a good vocal track. But as I said, it's not really what you want to hear. With a guitarist, you just want to hear the man play his guitar. Faster than an arrow and without a sound. All I've ever known has turned upside down. Do, 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 do. If you listen to it closely, it kind of sounds like Steely Dan a little bit. I mean, I know Frank Gambale has played with Steely Dan in the past, but it kind of sounds like Steely Dan a little bit. But I'll give the man his due. He's got guts to play guitar and sing. So, I'll give him that. But at the same time, just want to hear the man play his guitar. And then we got Samba de Somewhere, which features Chick Corea on Fender Rhodes. Anytime you get a guest appearance from Chick Corea, it's going to be good. And yeah, it's a really good track. It's probably one of the best tracks of the entire album. And Frank Gambale and Chick Corea really channeling that classic energy that they have in the Electric Band. And although it's a much more laid back number than what you would hear in the Electric Band, still a really good track. Then we got Kuraranda, which is another vocal track. Yeah, I could kind of do without this really. Bit too many vocals on this album, but as I said, there's some excellent instrumentals as well. Obsessed for Life, yeah, again, as I said earlier, he's a good singer, but maybe a bit too much vocals on this album. Leave Ozo Alone, absolutely amazing, absolutely brilliant. One of the best tracks of this album. The Land of Wonder, yeah, good playing, but again, too many vocals. This is my issue with this album. Obiragdo Fukukuka, another great song, but again, too many vocals. Robo Roo, great track. Forgotten but Not Gone, excellent track. Mambo Jambo is absolutely brilliant. And then we close out with a short and haunting track, One Not Two, with Frank Gambale on keyboards and vocals. In all fairness, this actually isn't a bad track. It's quite, a lovely track, but again, it's not really what you want to hear. So, aside from the vocal tracks, I mean, as I said, Frank Gambale has got a good singing voice, but it's not what you want to hear. This album actually does hold up very well. The instrumentals outweigh the vocals, but as I said, if we cut the vocals out, we would be having a very different conversation with this album. So, standout tracks for me are Humid Being, Samba de Somewhere, Robo Roo, Forgotten but Not Gone, and Mambo Jumbo. But yeah, this is still a good album, but I think maybe we could just cut down on the vocals, I would say. But still a strong album. But as I said, too many vocals. But I'll give Frank Gambale his due. He's actually hasn't got a bad voice. Actually, a pretty decent singer. So there you have it. Thunder from Down Under. Good solid album, but kind of lets me down a little bit because there are too many vocals. But still a good album and still plenty of good Frank Gambale guitar playing to get your teeth into. So there you have it. Thunder from Down Under. Good solid album, but too many vocals. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1991, and this one is called Note Worker. So again, Note Worker kind of follows the same pattern as Thunder from Down Under. Lots of vocal tracks, Frank Gambale's singing again. And as I said earlier about Thunder from Down Under, Frank Gambale is a good singer. He surprisingly has a good voice, but it's not really what you want to hear on a guitar album. You just want to hear instrumental music and the guitarist doing what he does best, and that's play his guitar. And thankfully, this would be the last album that Frank Gambale would incorporate vocals, as for the rest of his catalogue, he would go back to doing what he does best, and that's play kick-ass guitar instrumental music. But as I said, I'll give Frank Gambale his due. He's got guts, to play at the level he plays and sing at the same time. That takes guts. I'll give him that. But again, it's not what you want to hear. So featured on this album are Steve Smith from Vital Information, Dave Weckl from the Electric Band, Steve Kirschnick, Bob Harrison, Tim Landers, Key Akagi, and Freddie Ravel, Steve Tavioli, Walter Fowler, and Anjani. It's a good album, but as I said, if we cut the vocals out and we're left with the instrumental tracks, we would be having a very different conversation indeed. But still a good solid album, I would say. Corny. There he is, the man from Down Under. So all of the tracks are written and composed by Frank Gambale, and lyrics are written and provided by Frank Gambale and Stephanie Bennett. Yeah, what can I say really? There's the credits. There's the tracks of who plays on what. And there's the other tracks as well, and there's the lyrics as well for this album. So we've got about 4 vocal tracks. Yay. So first track we got is Lunar Rotation, great opener. Mr. Hollywood Line, yeah, it's good, but as I said, vocals, you can live without that. Calafia, another vocal track, yeah, it's all right, it's okay. We got a nice guitar drum jam, Jet Lag with Frank Gambale and Dave Weckl, excellent track, really good track. Stay With Me, yeah, it's a good vocal track, but with great acoustic playing, but yeah, I just don't want to hear vocals. And then we got Schmooze. Now, Schmooze originally appeared on Eric Marienthal's Crossroads album, which came out in 1990. And Frank Gambale didn't actually appear on that track on that album, but he composed it. But this is actually the first time his composition is actually featured on his album. And it's really good. And it's got a gorgeous soprano sax solo provided by Steve Tavioli, who's just an amazing sax player. And not really a guy who gets enough love as far as I'm concerned. He deserves more. That's a really good track. High Five, another great track. Awakening, another good song as well. And My Silent Heart, which is more like a solo acoustic track, but Frank Gambale is also singing. Yeah, it's okay, but as I said, less vocals, more instrumentals as far as I'm concerned. So standout tracks for me are Jet Rag, Schmooze, Lunar Rotation, and High Five. But good album, but maybe cut down on the vocals. That's what I say. So good strong album, but take the vocals out, we will be having a much different conversation indeed. So there you have it. Notes Worker, an enjoyable album, but yeah, too many vocals kind of let this down a little bit. But it's still got some great instrumentals, I would say. So there you have it. Notes Worker. Not bad. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1993, and this one is called The Great Explorers. So after the last couple of albums, which were very vocal heavy, Frank Gambale returns with a vengeance with a full instrumental album packed with loads of ferocious guitar playing, and badass compositions. This is what we wanted to hear. This is what we get, and Frank Gambale really delivers the goods as only he can. So I'm really pleased that Frank Gambale returned to his roots and doing what he does best, and that's play the guitar as well as anybody can, and proving once again that he is one of the best guitar players on the planet. And I absolutely love this album. You know, the first three albums were great. The last two, 50-50, but still had some great instrumentals. This one definitely makes up for both of them and then some. So let's have a look, shall we? There we are. And there's the guys as well. So all compositions are written and composed by Frank Gambale, with the exception of two tracks, which were co-composed by Frank Gambale and Gary Hoey. But yeah, this is a really good album and definitely more than makes up for the last two. So we've got Freddie Revell on keyboards, Stuart Ham on bass, Jonathan Mover on drums, and we've also got Tom Costa on Hammond organ from Vital Information. And this is pretty much a rock solid band effort. This is exactly what we want to hear. Frank Gambale with top notch musicians doing what he does best, and it's really good. So we got the first track, Frankly Speaking, which is just an absolute badass opener. One of the best openers for a Frank Gambale album I have ever heard. The Final Frontier, which is excellent. The Jaguar, another great track. The Great Explorers, which is the title track, excellent. Duet Tuet with Frank Gambale and Jonathan Mover, which is more like a guitar drum jam, excellent. She Knows Me Well, brilliant. Thundercurrent, another great song as well. Pathfinder, excellent. Dawn Over the Knoll Arbor, another great song as well. Cruising Altitude, brilliant. Naughty Business, absolutely amazing. And Stuart Ham and Jonathan Mover. I mean, does it get any better than that? These guys play with Joe Satriani. What a muscular rhythm section. Stuart Ham's a kick-ass bass player, and Jonathan Mover, one of the most iconic drummers in the world. You can't go wrong with those two. Freddie Revell and Tom Costa, what more can you say, really? Two amazing keyboard players. But yeah, this is a return to form for Frank Gambale. Love this album, and this is exactly what we wanted to hear from the man himself. So, standout tracks for me are Frankly Speaking, The Final Frontier, Duet Tuet, She Knows Me Well, Thundercurrent, Pathfinder, Cruising Altitude, and Naughty Business. But yeah, I love this album. This is exactly what I wanted to hear, and we got it. And yeah, this is one of my favourite Frank Gambale albums. I love this one a lot. So there you have it. The Great Explorers, one of Frank Gambale's best albums, and a return to form for one of the greatest guitar players in the world. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1984, and this one is called Passages. Excellent album, another one of my favourites from Frank Gambale, and this is much more of a rocky, bluesy kind of album, but still classic Frank Gambale, and no vocals here, just Frank Gambale doing what he does best, and that's play the guitar as good as anyone has ever done. And I love this album, it's really good. So featured on here are Otmar Ruiz on keyboards. God, he's a brilliant keyboard player. Alfonso Johnson, what can I say really? One of the greatest bass players ever. And Wilfredo Reyes, unbelievable stuff. So let's have a look, shall we? There we are. Unbelievable band he's got here. When you get Otmar Ruiz and Alphonso Johnson. You know you got something really special here. So this is pretty much a power quartet album, so to speak, and we get a guest appearance from Brandon Fields, who is featured on 2 tracks. But yeah, this is absolutely ferocious, this album. Really love this one a lot. And I always feel that Frank Gambale, he works best in smaller groups, a 4 piece or 5 piece or trio. And yeah, he doesn't disappoint here. So there we are. So this is much more of a band effort rather than just guest appearances, but a really good album. So we got Little Charmer, great opener, 6/8 Shaker, another great song as well. Passages, which is the title track, excellent. White Room, brilliant. D-Day, another great song as well. Nunzio's Near, another great song. Free Spirits, excellent. One with Everything, absolutely amazing. Roxana, absolutely incredible. Your Uru, another great song, and another alternative, but great collection of material from start to finish. Frank Gambale, what more can you say? He just is on fire here, on top musical form, as are the rest of the band as well, and it's just amazing. So standout tracks for me are Passages, Little Charmer, White Room, D-Day, Nunzio's Near, Free Spirits, One with Everything, Roxana, and another alternative. Love this album as well, and an excellent follow-up to The Great Explorers. So this is kind of like more of a rockier album. Still got the jazz elements in there, but this is a lot more rockier and a lot more ferocious than some of the previous Frank Gambale albums. And Frank Gambale just absolutely tears it up on the guitar. So there you have it, Passages, one of the best Frank Gambale albums ever, and one of my all-time favorites. Tremendous stuff. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1995, and this one is called Thinking Out Loud. So this is kind of like Frank Gambale's smooth jazz album in a way. It's a lot more laid back and lots more jazzier than the previous 2 albums and the ones that came before, but it's still a great album with some great guitar playing from Frank Gambale, but he plays kind of more traditional jazz guitar. But I like it. It's a really good album. It's a very summery, breezy kind of album, but no vocals here, thankfully, but still a very enjoyable listen nonetheless. So we got Osmaro Ruiz on keyboards, David Goldblatt on keyboards, Brian Olga on Hammond organ, Alphonso Johnson on bass, Tim Landers on bass, and Dave Weckl from the Electric Band on drums, and Wilfredo Reyes on percussion. But really good, solid album. Much more laid back than his previous albums, but still a good summary listen, and probably one of those albums you could listen to if you're driving in the sunset. It's a really good summary album, I would say. You could say, in a way, this is like Frank Gambale's commercial album, so to speak. So there you are. There's the guys who play on it, the album. There we go. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Frank Gambale. So the first track we got is Marguerite, which is a great song. Bondi Beach, another great track. No Neck Louie, another great track. Gaudi, another great track as well. Felicidad, excellent track. It's got a little bit of vocals, but it's harmless. Nothing to worry about. Dali is another great track. Infinity, A Lover's Night, The Avengers Suite Part 1 and 2, and My Little Viper. Interesting title. But great collection of songs from start to finish. And as I said, a lot more laid back than some of Frank Gambale's previous albums. But it's still good. It's a really good album. I really enjoyed this one a lot. So standout tracks for me are Marguerite, Bondi Beach, No Neck Louie, Infinity, A Lover's Night, The Avengers Suite Parts 1 and 2, and My Little Viper. Great album. I would call this Frank Gambale's smooth jazz album, but I wouldn't say this is like an album for radio play. It's still very much classic Frank Gambale, but still a very laid back and commercial album for him, but very enjoyable nonetheless. So there you have it. Thinking Out Loud, a nice breezy summery album from one of the greatest guitar players in the world. But I really enjoyed this one a lot. It's a good solid album and one that I do enjoy listening to, but one I haven't gone back to in a while. I think we'll change that soon. So there you have it. Thinking Out Loud, excellent album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2000, and this one is called Coming to Your Senses. So we're now heading into the 2000s, and Frank Gambale is still putting out top notch quality music, and this one is no exception. It's a great album, great collection of songs from start to finish, and all compositions written and composed by Frank Gambale, who's still very much at the top of his game. Love this album. So let's have a look, shall we? So, featured on this album, we've got Mark Schulman on drums, Hans Zerhumilin on keyboards, and Rick Farabracci on bass. God, he's another one. He's excellent bass player. And this is pretty much a quartet album. It's pretty much the same lineup on the entire album, and Frank Gambale on electric and acoustic guitars, but really good album. So there is the sleeve notes about how this project came together and who played on each track. But it's a good album. No vocals here. And we got a guest appearance from Joel Taylor as well. He's another great drummer as well. And a guest appearance from Ray Brinker, another great drummer as well. But yeah, this is a good solid album and very enjoyable. No vocals here, thankfully, but Frank Gambale at his ferocious best. So we got Up in Beechwood, great opener, Circular Key, Major Fascination, another great song as well. Salvador Once More, excellent track. Cybernauts, another great track. Mirage Mystery, good solid track. Isola de Elba, another great song. Land of the Lille, great song as well. The Italian Job and the Loch Ness Monster. But I like it. It's a really good, solid album. Lots of great guitar playing from Frank Gambale, and all the musicians on here, they just sound tremendous. So the standout tracks for me are Up in Beechwood, Major Fascination, Salvador Once More, Mirage Mystery, Land of the Lille, The Italian Job, and The Loch Ness Monster. But great album from start to finish, very enjoyable, and Frank Gambale at his ferocious best, playing that mean guitar as only he can. Love this album, highly recommended if you can find it. It's not an easy one to find, as are some of Frank Gambale's albums, but if you can find them, buy them, and get this one as well. It's a really good one. Trust me, you won't regret it. So there you have it. Coming to Your Senses. He's come to his senses, everyone. He's not singing anymore. Good fitting title, but a good solid album, I would say. Coming to Your Senses. Love it. So we move on to the next album, which came out in 2001, and this is a double live recording, and this one is called Resident Aliens Live Bootlegs. So this is a double album featuring Frank Gambale with Rick Farabracci on bass and three different drummers who appear on both discs. Ray Brinker on drums, Joel Taylor and Tos Panos, another great drummer as well. And this is pretty much a series of live performances from Frank Gambale, but it's really, really good. So let's have a look, shall we? There we are. So on disc one, we got Equinox, Dreamtime, The Shores of Baja, Lydia's Love Van, and then on disc two, we got Nothing Personal, Goanna Logic, The Wow, Walking the Wombat, True Blue Blues, and New Boots. So a lot of these live performances took place in the Baked Potato and between like late 99 to mid 2000. So a lot of these tracks are like standards and there are some originals as well. But it's a good live album, I would say. It's a good solid live album. And it's pretty much like a trio, but with different drummers appearing at different times. But it's a really good album, I would say. So standout tracks for me on disc one are Equinox, The Shores of Bayer, and Lydia's Love Van. And on disc two, Nothing Personal, which was played amazingly by Michael Brecker. The Wow, Walking the Wombats, and True Blue Blues. It's a good live album. If you can find it, it's a good. It's really good. You know, it's not an easy one to pick up, but I think it's really good. So there you have it. Frank Gambale, The Resident Aliens live bootlegs. Excellent album. Not an easy one to find, but very enjoyable. And if you can pick it up, highly recommended. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2002, and it's a live recording, and it featured a concert that took place in Poland in 1996, and it features Frank Gambale with a group of Polish musicians, and this one is called Absolutely Live in Poland. Now, I have said from the beginning, as great as Frank Gambale sounds in the studio, personally for me, I think Frank Gambale sounds even better live, and this one is no exception. Frank Gambale in a quartet setting once again, which I've always said is one of many environments that he thrives in, and it just features stuff from Frank Gambale's career, including a cover version as well. And it's got 8 songs, but they're all quite relatively long tracks. Some are given the extended workouts, but it's a really, really good album and not an easy one to find. But still, if you can pick it up, it's highly recommended. It's fantastic. So there they are. So on drums, we've got Krzysztof Zawodzki. On bass, we've got Marcin Pospieszalski. And on keyboards, we got Zbigniew Jakubek. A bit of a mouthful there, but those are the musicians featured on this live album, and of course Frank Gambale on guitar. So the first track we got is Marguerite, which is excellent. Felicidad, great song. Passages is amazing. Goldie is another great track. No Neck Louis is excellent. Free Spirits, another great song as well. Little Charmer, which is the longest track on the album, which is like 12 minutes long, and a cover version of Stella by Starlight. But it's a really good live album, quite a rare one as well. I think it's long out of print, but I think you can pick it up somewhere. But if you can buy it, it's really good. So standout tracks for me are Marguerite, Felicidad, Passages, Little Charmer, Free Spirits, but good live album. Bit more laid back than Frank Gambale live, but still a good album nonetheless, and a great live recording as well, and a great performance. So there you have it. Absolutely Live in Poland. Excellent live recording from Frank Gambale. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2004, and this one is called Raison d'être. So another great fusion classic from Frank Gambale with some super heavyweights on this one. We've got Billy Cobham on drums, say no more right there. And we've got bass duties handled between Billy Cobham and Rick Fabracci on the same album as your rhythm section. Does it get any better than that? And then we've got Steve Billman also on bass, who's featured on half of the tracks on this album. But this is absolutely amazing. Does not get any better than that. So this is pretty much a power trio album, so no keyboards on this. So Billy Cobham is featured on the entire album, and Rick Fabrici, he's featured on most of the album, and Steve Billman, he's on like half of the tracks as well. But yeah, it does not get any better than that. Frank Gambale and Billy Cobham together. So all of the compositions are written and composed by Frank Gambale. Wow, this is top-notch stuff. That's all I've got to say. So this is kind of like made up of two parts, but with multiple tracks. So part one's got 8 tracks, and part two has got 4 tracks, but altogether there's like 12 tracks, but it's kind of like made up in two parts, so to speak. So on part one, we've got Foreign Country, Cashination, Bittersweet, Table for One, Neveu Vignettes, Debut Solo, Melodic, 2 Minutes BC, Canapelli, and then on part two, we've got May the Fourths Be With You, Monkey Wrench, Smug, and Complex Emotions. Brilliant stuff here. Billy Cobham, he can just make anything sound good. He is one of the greatest drummers in the world, one of the true legends. He's done it all, and he just brings such a muscular feel to the music with his drumming. Rick Fabrici, top-notch bass player. Steve Billman, great bass player as well. Everyone just sounds amazing. And Frank Gambale, he's on top musical form as always. So standout tracks to me are Foreign Country, Bittersweet, Table for One, 2 Minutes BC, May the Fourths Be With You, Smug, and Complex Emotions. Great album here. Gambale and Cobham playing together, that's the highlight for me. Doesn't get any better than that. And you get 2 top-notch bass players thrown into the mix, and you've got yourself an excellent album. Love this. Raison did too. Brilliant album, one of Frank Gambale's best, and one that kind of gets ignored, really. I think we'll change that. Definitely got to give this a listen. If you like Billy Cobham, you can't go wrong here. And if you like Frank Gambale, you can't go wrong there either. If you like Frank Gambale and Billy Cobham together, this is the one for you. Excellent stuff. Raison did too. Brilliant album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2005, and this one is called Natural High. So Natural High is an acoustic album, probably the most laid back album since Thinking Out Loud, but unlike Thinking Out Loud, which still had a lot of electric stuff going on, this is a complete acoustic album. Frank Gambale on acoustic guitar, Otmara Ruiz on piano, Alan Caron from UZEB on bass, and Mike Shapiro on percussion, who's featured on 4 tracks. But this is mainly an acoustic trio, no drums, apart from a little bit of percussion, as I mentioned. But it's a really good album. It's a very laid back album. But you can still hear it's Frank Gambale, but it's just very different to what he's done previously. So let's have a look. There they are. So you can see it's a very different kind of album to what we've seen from Frank Gambale in the past. And all tracks are written and composed by Frank Gambale. We got You Are All the Things, lovely opener, Will Remember December, Dee's Living Room, great song, Fortune, The Long and Short of It, Have You Met Tom Jones? Well, that's not unusual. Principessa, Scottish Highlands, and Another Challenger. It's a good album. It's a very laid back album. Some great acoustic guitar playing from Frank Gambale. So no electric here. And this is a different side to Frank Gambale. You know, he has played acoustic guitar on his previous albums, but this is the first time we're getting a full acoustic outing from Frank Gambale. And it doesn't disappoint. You know, as I said at the beginning, every Frank Gambale album in his catalogue is very different, and you can see his guitar playing evolves, and this is proof right here. You know, he goes down the acoustic path and he delivers. You know, he's no slouch on the acoustic guitar. He's up there, let me tell you. He's really, really good. I know he's more known for electric guitar, but as I said, he's no slouch on the acoustic. He can do it too. So, standout tracks for me are You Are All the Things, Fortune, The Long and Short of It, Scottish Highlands, and Another Challenger. Great album, a lovely album, a very laid back album, and one that doesn't really get talked about a lot. But as I said, if you want to hear Frank Gambale just playing purely acoustic, this is definitely one worth checking out. I think it's really good. So there you have it. Natural High, the most laid back album since Thinking Out Loud, but I would say it goes above a bit more laid back than Thinking Out Loud, but really good nonetheless. So there you have it. Natural High. Brilliant stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2007, and this is a live album featuring a heavyweight rhythm section, and this one is called Made in Australia. So this is a concert that took place in Melbourne, Australia in 2003, and it features Frank Gambale with two heavyweights, drummer Virgil Donati and bassist Rick Fabraci. You cannot get any heavier and more better than these two. And a lot of the compositions that are featured on here are Frank Gambale material and some Planet X material as well, getting a trio workout. But this is ferocious stuff, and you can really hear the influence of Alan Holdsworth in the music as well, which is no surprise because I know Frank Gambale loves Alan Holdsworth, and Virgil Donati, of course, has played with Holdsworth in Planet X. But wow, this is a really good live album. And as I said before, as great as Frank Gambale is in the studio, he sounds better live for me anyway. I think he's really good. There we are. There's the three badasses. So we got the first track, The User, written and composed by Virgil Donati. Great opener. Little Charmer, which is kind of sounds a little bit like Holdsworth. Jerry's Waltz by Rick Fabraci. Great song as well. Yang, another great track as well. Sphere of Influence by Rick Fabraci. Great song. Mind Over, brilliant. Alien Hip Hop from Planet X's Quantum, excellent album. Really gets a Frank Gambale treatment here. And A Little Something, great, great live album. And as I said, if we were doing just live albums, this one could probably be at the top. It's a really good album. And although there's only 8 tracks, they really get a full extended live workout here. So the standout tracks for me are Little Charmer, Joey's Waltz, Alien Hip Hop, A Little Something, and Sphere of Influence and The User. You could say in a way, is this Frank Gambale goes metal? Maybe, but it's really, really good. And yeah, Frank Gambale at his shredding best. Virgil Donati just brings so much power with his drumming, and Rick Fabraci, he's just rock solid on bass. He's just an amazing player. Everyone is on top musical form. This is a fantastic live album. Highly recommended. Got to check this one out. It's excellent. So there you have it. Made in Australia. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2010, and this one is called Natural Selection. So this is kind of like a sequel and continuation of Natural High, and it's a lot more laid back. And we've got Otmar Ruiz on piano, Alan Coran on bass from UZEB, and Joel Taylor on percussion. And it's a great follow up to Natural High. And yeah, it's really good. It's a really good album. As I said, a lot more jazzy, and as I said, pretty much in the same sort of style as Natural High. So let's have a look. So there's a little breakdown of what each track is all about, and there are some liner notes as well. There we go. That's it. So all of the tracks are written and composed by Frank Gambale, And this is pretty much a trio album with Joel Taylor featured on 3 tracks. And as I said, it's pretty much a very laid back album, but at the same time, it's still very enjoyable. So the first track we got is Teaser, which is a track that Frank Gambale wrote for the late great T. Levitz for his solo album called School of the Arts, which is absolutely amazing. And we got Smog Eyes, which is kind of like a cover tune that Frank Gambale heard many years ago by Ted Brown. Absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, Chick Corea gets a nice little nod here. Tones for Chick's Bones, which is based on the classic standard called Tones for Jones Bones. And it gets a nice little workout here. And Otmar Ruiz really channels the spirits of Chick Corea with great piano playing. Then we got In From Somewhere, another great track. Gijoria is another great track as well. Good Morning Sunshine, another great track as well. And then we get a reworking of Samba de Somewhere, which originally appeared on Thunder from Down Under. Great song as well. Gets a much more stripped down, laid back approach. Then we got the title track, Natural Selection, which is really good as well. And then we got Gambashwari, which is another track that Frank Gambale wrote for T. Levitz. But good album, very laid back, but highly enjoyable nonetheless. And as I said, Frank Gambale, very versatile. As I said at the beginning, all of his albums are very different, and this one is no exception. And it's really good. As I said, it's a lot more jazzier than some of his previous albums. So standout tracks for me are Tones for Chick's Bones, Samba de Somewhere, Natural Selection, Teaser, and Smog Eyes. But excellent album, and hard to believe that this was Frank Gambale's last studio album to date. It's been what, 14 years now since Frank Gambale last put out an album featuring new material. Now I know he does have a new album coming out. I think. I've seen a couple of new tracks posted up, but whether or not we'll actually see a new album remains to be seen. I know he's more or less backing his wife these days in her band, but I'd like to think that we'll see a new Frank Gambale album someday because it's long overdue. But this was the last one, and it's a very good one, but I'd love to see a new one someday. Fingers crossed. So there you have it. Natural Selection, excellent album, and the last Frank Gambale studio album to date. Tremendous stuff, and fingers crossed we'll see a brand new one from him very, very soon. Love this album. Excellent. So, which album out of all 16 do I think is the best Frank Gambale album? Well, as I said at the beginning, they're all different, they're all good, apart from 2 albums which were a bit too vocal heavy for my liking. But aside from that, there's some great stuff here. I love all of them. But if I have to choose one album that I would consider to be Frank Gambale's best album, I would definitely go with the first album, Brave New Guitar. This is the one that started it all. This is the one that pretty much set the tone for what Frank Gambale is going to be all about. And in a way, it's got the sound that would go on to become a major part of the Chick Corea Elektric Band's identity. And as I said, if you're looking to get into Frank Gambale's albums, this is the one to start with. It's a really good album, lots of classic tracks on here that he continued to play throughout most of his solo career. But I just think Brave New Guitar is absolutely tremendous and one of the finest debut albums ever by a musician. And for me, it's probably Frank Gambale's best album. And some of the later albums are really good, apart from the ones that I mentioned. But above all else, I consider Brave New Guitar to be the best Frank Gambale album ever. And if I had to choose a live album, I'll definitely go with Frank Gambale Live. It's fantastic and a real showcase for what Frank Gambale is all about. But for me, Brave New Guitar wins hands down, without a doubt. So there you have it. Brave New Guitar. For me, the best Frank Gambale album ever. Excellent stuff. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Frank Gambale album? Is it Brave New Guitar, A Present for the Future, Live, Thunder from Down Under, Notes Worker, The Great Explorers, Passages, Thinking Out Loud, Come to Your Senses, Absolutely Live in Poland, Resident Aliens, Live Bootlegs, Raison d'Etre, Natural High, Made in Australia, or Natural Selection? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.